Introduction. Despite the fact that integration began 50 years ago, Black Americans remain the primary targets of conservative hate groups, police brutality, and abusive government actions. According to a Federal Bureau of Investigation annual report, blacks are the victims of approximately 67% of hate crimes, though they are only 12.4% of the nation's total population. With recent incidents such as 170 church burnings, black men dragged to their death behind pickup trucks in Texas and Illinois, or shot 41 times in New York while reaching for a wallet, it is not difficult to understand how the tally quickly reaches 67%. The FBI's hate crime list does not even include soft crimes like denying black people home mortgages, jobs, or the right to use highways without being pulled over for driving while black. Within every category of socioeconomic deprivation, blacks represent 6 to 8 times their proportionate number of the general population. The fact that blacks are overrepresented on this nation's welfare, poverty, unemployment, homeless, drug addiction, and crime rolls is no accident and should come as no surprise. The function of racism is to marginalize black people. Racism is an undeniable factor in American society. It is distinct from and plays a greater role in life prospects than any form of gender, class, ethnic, language, or religious discrimination. Contrary to prevailing myths, America has never been a colorblind society. Yet, racism continues to be ignored at all levels of government, while the nation's attention and resources are focused on less contentious issues. White society has an outside, excuse me, white society has an out of sight, out of mind attitude about racism and avoids any substantive discussions of, let alone action against racism. The callous indifference, disrespect, and sometimes actual hatred that the majority society feels towards black people are creating conditions that are dangerously parallel to those in Germany prior to the Jewish Holocaust of the 1930s and the 1940s. Daniel J. Goldhagen, author of Hitler's Willing Executioners, writes about the Holocaust and the perils that can be expected when any national government permits hatred of an identifiable minority group to fester without efforts to mitigate or diffuse the hatred. When such widespread hatred goes unchecked in society, the targeted minority group is at risk. The racial problem in America continues to exist because some ignore the problem and others do not know what to do. It is to that latter group that I address this book. In 1994, in my first book, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Search for Power and Economic Justice, I wrote about the structural inequities that became part of our society during slavery and Jim Crow segregation. 7 years after that book was published, these structural inequalities remain unaddressed. Black Labor, White Wealth analyzed the historical relationship between whites and blacks, customs to enrich itself via the unpaid labor of enslaved. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. My apologies. It analyzed the historical relationship between whites and blacks, then tracked how the Western world used laws, policies, and social customs to enrich itself via the unpaid labor of enslaved black Africans. Black Labor, White Wealth documented how legal, political, and economic advantages were passed on to succeeding generations of white Americans. These legacies of white preference effectively maldistributed nearly 100% of the nation's wealth and resources into the hands of the majority of society and relegated blacks to permanently dependent, non competitive loser status. In our democracy, many have forgotten or simply do not know that the Federalist Papers, the foundation of the Constitution, laid out the responsibility of the majority to protect the rights of the minority in a majority rule social democracy. Thus, it is the responsibility of the white majority to protect the rights of the black minority. Not surprisingly, that protection has not occurred. Instead, the white majority has made the black race a permanent and voluntary minority and has systematically denied generations of blacks sufficient means to protect their own rights and compete in mainstream society. Powernomics, the national plan to empower black America, proposes a plan of action for blacks to create a new empowered, a new prosperous and empowered community that builds up. Pardon me. Powernomics, the national plan to empower black America, proposes a plan of action for blacks to create a new, prosperous, and empowered community that builds upon the yet unrealized competitive advantages of black America. The economic, political, and educational action steps, principles, strategies, and models that are offered in this book are based on analysis of the complex web of racial monopolies and other structural impediments that continue to drive blacks deeper into an underclass structure. They also come from a comparative study of wealthy and powerful minority groups that have lifted themselves in competitive positions with the majority society. Within the majority society. This book is a plan specifically intended for Black America because no other group will support the elevation of blacks to a position of group prosperity, respect, and competitiveness. It is not in the best interest of others to help blacks become more competitive. Thus, it is up to Black America to pull itself up by its bootstraps. Empowerment will not happen by chance, accident, or wishes. It will require purposeful planning. Powernomics, the national plan to empower Black America, picks up where Black labor white wealth left off. It represents a conceptual framework and a plan to lead Black America to political and economic self-sufficiency and competitiveness by the year 2005. Now, obviously, I must be very, very late. I just heard about this book not 2 weeks ago. As a matter of fact, 2 days after I heard about the book, I went and grabbed the book. But I'm reading the book now. I hope you're enjoying listening to it. And even though I fumble over the words or what have you, like I said, I never read out loud. So this is just something new I'm doing. And hopefully it influences others around me and others that know of me. And, whatever, man. I'm just trying to do something positive and just get people to see that reading is fundamental. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a great way to learn. And we can all do it. And even if we just got to start there, I'm going to go ahead and lead the forefront so I can show others that, hey, it can be done. We can do it. If I could do it, you definitely could do it. Okay, so where was I? Okay, the term powernomic combines the concept of power and economics. Power is the ability to get things done despite the resistance and opposition of others. Economics is the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and wealth. Powernomics then is the ability of blacks to pool resources and powers to produce. Let me get this right. Powernomics then is the ability of blacks to pool resources and power to produce, distribute, and consume, and the facts and recommendations represented. That wasn't right. My apologies. Economics is the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and wealth. Powernomics then is the ability of blacks to pool resources and power to produce, distribute, and consume in a way that creates goods and wealth that black people control. The facts and recommendations presented in this book are sometimes stark, bitter medicine because Powernomics is like a strong tonic intended to stir to action and guide those people who are motivated to help Black America in fundamental ways. Much of my personal inspiration for writing Powernomics came from the readers of Black Labor, White Wealth and people who attended lectures and workshops I have presented. Many of them thanked me for explaining the problems and presenting principles that should be used in crafting solutions. They then asked me to take one more step and blend my experiences and research into a program of action that individuals and groups can follow to empower their communities. Powernomics provide that missing link between the historical analysis of the problems facing blacks and the strategies needed to correct those problems. This is not a book on how to succeed in white corporate America or how to invest one's personal funds for retirement, nor is it a volume of warm and fuzzy motivational stories about personal triumphs and successes and how to improve one's relationships with the opposite sex. This book is about people surviving and prospering. The tone is direct and simple. I make no pretense of being objective. This book makes moral judgments and predicts that racial disasters will occur unless this nation seriously addresses the historical injustice imposed on Black Americans. This book has two premises. First, those who desire to create effective solutions to a problem must understand the nature and the history of the problem. Second, Black America needs a national plan with how-to strategies in order to move into a political and economic competitiveness with America's mainstream society and its various ethnic subgroups. Admittedly, Powernomics runs counter to the conventional thinking of visible and successful blacks in America today. Though the wealth and power gap between blacks and non-blacks is widening, visible and successful blacks remain committed to protecting their own personal comfort zone by avoiding association with anything that is identifiably black. Today's black leaders in many cases display some of the inappropriate behavior discussed in this book, and While many of these leaders are personal acquaintances and friends, it has been their choice to give top priority to working, not for black people, but for minorities, women, poor people, people of color, the handicapped, and newly arriving immigrants. The failure of visible and successful blacks to appropriately lead the race leaves 36 million black Americans in a leadership crisis. The Powernomics plan is offered to the nation in hopes of saving Black America. It is a synthesis of my experiences in government, business, research, and academia. It is necessarily subjective, contains few citations, and frequently uses first person references. It is not intended to be an academic recitation of facts or of other authors' opinions. It is offered more informally as a roadmap with clearly marked milestones. It will not answer all your questions. Once you have finished this book, if you are not motivated to use this plan to help build a more competitive and independent Black America, then simply lay it down and continue doing what you normally do. However, for those who want to help and unjustly treated and forgotten people, welcome aboard. Accept the reality that the legacies of slavery and Jim Crow semi-slavery still exist in various forms of structural racism. Then try some of the countermeasures this book recommends. The probability is high, even at this late hour, that with deliberate actions, black people can still become a competitive and self-sufficient group in America. It was in the spirit of that possibility that this national plan was written. The following section provides summaries of the 8 chapters of this book. Chapter 1 paints a picture of the depth and magnitude of Black Americans' socioeconomic predicament. It examines the collective inherited advantages of being white and the collective inherited disadvantages of being black. It describes how 4 centuries of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and benign neglect locked blacks into the lowest social strata, while maldistributing nearly 100% of this nation's wealth and resource power into the hands of a pecking order of European and other ethnic groups. The socioeconomic disparities between the races have evolved into modern-day monopolies protected by structural racism, inheritance laws, immigration, and other public policies. These established monopolies not only guarantee white society an advantaged lifestyle, but they also predetermine racial winners and losers in a supposedly open and competitive society. Instead of being truly open and competitive, American marketplaces are dominated by powerful political and economical, American marketplaces are dominated by powerful political and economic racial forces. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 introduces the rationale for Powernomics empowerment culture, group vision, and related enabling paradigms, ethno-aggregation, and vertical integration. This chapter discusses the importance of having group self-interest and a sense of group competition. The paradigms of ethno-aggregation and vertical integration provide blacks with tools to alter their mindset and transform their traditional way of seeing, thinking, and behaving in regard to racial matters. Clearly understanding the empowerment vision of power economics and its paradigms can help Black Americans make decisions that are in the group's best interest. This chapter also explains how the application of these paradigms as conceptual templates can increase consistency and efficiency in race-related decision-making. Ethno-aggregation and vertical integration can serve as the conceptual cookie cutters that can be used to build racial unity and replace outdated passive civil rights and integration ideologies. Chapter 3 focuses on the importance of community and the role that communities play in fostering competitive group politics and group economics. It identifies 3 important elements that black people need in order to transform their residential neighborhoods from mere geographical groupings into functional communities. Once blacks from real communities, they can then use them for they can then use them as repositories for storing their history, culture, wealth, income, businesses, security, and sense of peoplehood. This chapter lists the steps to build real black communities and discusses how a community builds its radius of trust, cooperation, and accountability. It also stresses the importance of marking and closing black communities. A major part of this chapter examines 2 of the most pernicious social systems devised to control human beings and destroy their sense of community. The first system of meritorious manumission, often called Willie Lynchism, was imposed on blacks in the early 1700s. This social conditioning process is compared with the system of brainwashing that was imposed on American soldiers and Korean prisoner war camps and Korean prisoners of war camps during the early 1950s. The techniques and results of both systems were nearly identical and engineered behaviors into the target populations that destroyed group unity and reduced the communities to groups of people who function as individuals. Pardon me, I just want y'all to know that sometimes I read fast. For some reason, I just inhale fast. I don't know. That's just who I am. I apologize. I will try my best to read slower. Just bear with me. Again, this is my first time trying something new, and hopefully, it works out. Matter of fact, I think that's been 15 minutes. I think my time is up, so I'm going to continue in the introduction. Let me see. You know what? Never mind. I'm gonna just continue because maybe I can get it all in one shot. Chapter 4 urges change in the traditional roles of schools and educating black children. Specifically, this chapter advises black Americans to take control of the governance of their neighborhood, schools, and redesign them around the needs, interests, and goals of black America. The premise of this chapter is that schools in producing the premise of this chapter is that schools are producing exactly what they were designed to produce: a marginally trained black laborer capable of taking orders and using his or her physical strength to entertain, enrich, protect, and comfort the majority white society. Since schools were never intended to educate black children to be self sufficient, independent, and competitive, this chapter argues that they must begin to receive an education that is reality based and teaches them to live, work, and compete in a pluralistic society. in a in a so sorry. I like it so much. I'm reading faster than I should be. I'm just getting into the book. Um, where was I? The premise of this chapter was that schools are producing exactly what they were designed to produce: a marginally trained black laborer capable of taking orders and using his or her physical strength to entertain, enrich, protect, and comfort the majority white society. Since schools were never intended to educate black children to be self-sufficient, independent, and competitive, this chapter argues that they must begin to receive an education that is reality based and teaches them to live, work, and compete in a pluralistic society. Implementation of the Powernomics National Plan requires that black Americans educate their youth to use their intellectual resources to help the group. To accomplish this end, schools in black communities must close down. Like an automobile assembly factory getting ready to produce new models, retool and reopen only after they are ready to accept a new role in which educational goals, curricula, teaching methods, governance, and funding have been crafted in alignment with the National Empowerment Plan for Black America. Let me try to move this back over here. Black communities must also inspire and demand political changes on a local level regarding the methods of school governance and funding. Thus, this chapter discusses the role that education should play to free new generation of black minds from the old social conditioning so that black children can gain the skills, social unity, and human resources to compete with the children from all other groups. Chapter 5 offers a new economic model to convert black neighborhoods into core economic engines for building wealth and practicing group economics. It highlights how blacks have remained outside of this nation's economic booms and prosperity for centuries. An endless influx of European ethnic immigrants have entered this nation as first class citizens and joined the majority white society in the economic suppression and exploitation of black Americans. This chapter points out how black Americans are violating every known principle of group economics, the growing wealth and income inequalities between blacks and whites, how ethnic groups build niche businesses, how whites and ethnic groups boycott black businesses, the capital and brain drain from black communities, racism and immigration policies, and the self inflicted damage of non economic integration and civil rights. Chapter 6 is a how to chapter. It serves as a user guide to empower black communities by industrializing them. With Black America with America downsizing its industrial capacity, this chapter stresses the importance of black America building and operating its own industries to capture and control technology rather than continuing to be its primary victim. The black people are the only population group denied the cultural, economic, and technological benefits of participating in any of the world's industrial revolutions. It is still not too late for us to build our own. Based upon our consumer spending patterns, cultural assets, and market advantages, we can create vertical industries within our own business communities. This chapter identifies some of the industries, pardon me, this chapter identifies some of the industries that blacks should pursue. Moreover, it suggests ways in which blacks can amass capital and control consumer markets, using the basic Powernomics empowerment tools of ethno-aggregation and vertical integration. This chapter describes how to construct industries by vertically linking every process, from supplying raw materials at the bottom of the chain to selling the product to the retail consumer markets at the top. Chapter 7 looks at politics through the framework of the Powernomics vision and offers 12 principles blacks can use to win group-based political benefits. It questions the historical practice of black Americans ritualistically electing political candidates to public office without receiving reciprocal benefits, voting simply to exercise the right and failing to hold those they elect accountable for delivering benefits to black communities. The political principles presented in this chapter show black Americans how to play and win as a group in competitive politics. Chapter 8. Chapter 8 proposes a theology of economics. It issues a call for black religious organizations to use their vast resources to enhance the earthly quality of life for black people, just as churches do for every other ethnic or racial population. Nearly every known organized religion has developed a theological doctrine to morally justify and, in some cases, even support exploitation of black people. To counter the effects of centuries of spiritual and economic abuse, this chapter recommends expanding the traditional role of black churches to encompass specific economic and political activities that are needed to improve the immediate quality of life of black people. In these 8 chapters in the appendices, Powernomics presents a national plan that analyzes the racial dynamics within our society and prescribes new political education, economic, and social remedies designed to bring about true equality between the races. The analysis and recommendations within this book are designed to stimulate soul-searching discussions among all segments of our society, particularly within the black community. Since black America stands to benefit or lose the most, black Americans must lead the way. On an editorial note, the black community in the United States is divided over whether to identify its members as black or African American. In this book, the two terms are used interchangeably. Similarly, there is a debate regarding whether the terms white and black should be capitalized. It is illogical to capitalize American Indian, Hispanic, Arab, or Asian, yet not capitalize the terms used to describe the two largest racial populations in the United States. Accordingly, I have chosen to capitalize both white and black. In addition, as a writer who is black, my perspective shifts between the first and third person when writing about black people. Finally, a major premise of this text is that black people lack communities and have yet to build communities, but I frequently use the term black community to refer to black people simply as a population. Now, for those readers who are ready to shift into a reality mode and begin a new road to black prosperity and true equality, let us begin our journey. Peace.